I paid $40 for the brokenest PS4 Slim on eBay. Can I fix it, or did I just rip myself off? Well, whoever was selling this for sure fixed it until it was broken. So this is what I bought for $40. I do have the covers in the mid frame that go with this, but this is how it came, this is how it was listed. So now I've got to sort it all out, inspect it all, and what stinks is I have to put this all together just to figure out what's actually wrong with it. Then once it's all together, then I can take it apart and fix whatever needs to be fixed. Oh boy, what did I get myself into? We do have the motherboard. The motherboard, at least on this side, looks good. We got to get this clamp off and see what it looks like under that. And everything that I can see actually looks fine. So I got to get all of this stuff inspected, and then we'll put it back together enough to test it and see if we can figure out what exactly is wrong. So first things first, this ribbon cable is torn right here. Don't know how well that's showing on camera, but I do need to replace that. So we'll replace that ribbon cable. Then we'll plug it into here, put this top cover back on, and then the disk drive will be ready to go back in the PS4. So here we have our first clue at what might be wrong with the motherboard. It looks like that someone might have gotten a disc stuck in here or something, and they really ripped up this piece of plastic that goes over the manual eject system on this disk drive. So I'm guessing what happened was they got a disc stuck in it, and then the drive probably stopped working because there's fuses on the motherboard that control this drive, and if you overload the drive, then it'll blow those fuses. So we'll check that in a minute, but right now we got to get this disk drive all the way back together, so then we can check the rest of the system. So we're going to take just a second to test the fuses. I'm turning my multimeter on to ohms. That's this symbol right here. That measures resistance to electrical flow. Fuses should have very, very little. Let's see what we have. And that fuse is good. And that fuse is good. There is one more fuse for the disk drive, and that is this fuse right here. And that is totally normal as well. So no problems with the motherboard as far as the disk drive fuses go. I had suspected that there would be a problem, but there isn't so far, so let's keep going. And look at that, the perfect amount of thermal paste. So far we've done a whole bunch of fixing just to see what's wrong with it, so then we can go and fix it again. But let's see if it starts up and at least gets us somewhere. Okay, let's check and see if the disk drive makes noise. Okay, good. Now let's see if it starts up. You think it's gonna start? Oh, it beeps, but nothing happens after that. Well, that's not good news so far. So based on that, I suspect this power supply is probably faulty. So I've got another one I'm just gonna put in real quick just to test that and see if that's the problem or not. Cross your fingers, I really hope that's it. If not, we've got a lot more digging to do. Okay, power supply replaced. Let's try the disk drive again. Definitely have power there. Now, do you think it's gonna work this time? Oh no. Bummer. I was hoping it was the power supply, but unfortunately it looks like there must be a problem on the motherboard. So let's get the power supply back out, take the motherboard back out, and see if we can figure out where the problem is. Now I did take a closer look at this power supply, and one thing I just noticed is you see this component right here and how it's up off of the board. This tells me that I think this console, there's a good chance it was dropped, because I think that's what caused this to be lifted up off the board. You can see there's some sort of thermal paste under this, so this is supposed to be squished tightly to the board, and I'm guessing when it was dropped that was enough to knock it loose, well, sort of loose from the board, knock it away from the board a little bit. So then that also tells me that there's a good chance that one of these BGA chips, like this one, or hopefully not, but maybe this one, have possibly come loose from the motherboard. Under each of these, there's a whole bunch of little solder balls that connect it to each of these circuit traces outside the board here that you see. So if that's the case, then this one might not be fixable. I will try to at least reflow these. You also can take them off and reball them. I'm not going to be reballing it today. It's just not worth my time, but sometimes that will fix them. So I'm going to look around on the board a little bit, see if I can figure out anything else that might be wrong. And if not, then we will go ahead and do a reflow on this Southbridge chip, possibly even the APU. First of all, I'm just going to do a few quick checks. Make sure that there's nothing shorted together. So I'm going to make sure these two pins, there's a positive and a negative here, and just make sure they're not shorted, which they're not. Then I'm going to go through and check these capacitors and make sure they're not shorted together, and then we'll check a few other components. Now, just looking at this board, I did just notice this right here, and it appears that there is a missing capacitor right here. So that definitely could be a problem. I don't know if it's the problem, but it definitely could be, and it goes right along with our theory that this was dropped. So I'm gonna look around on the board, see if there's anything else I noticed. Let me know in the comment section if there's anything you noticed that is missing off the board, and then I can take a look at that after the video is live if I don't fix it. So far, I haven't found any other problems, so let's get this capacitor replaced, and then let's test it again and see if that will happen to fix it. So first things first, we're gonna use some flux. I always get questions about the liquid that I put on here. So this is called flux. Oh, it's coming out pretty fast there. Don't need quite that much, but that's okay. So what flux does is it actually just helps the solder flow. So I'm gonna use some hot air. I'm gonna remove this capacitor and put it up on this board. All right, we have the motherboard back in, the power supply is back in, and it's ready to test. Do you think it's gonna work this time? I don't think it will, but I still hope it will. Okay, normal, the disk drive has power. Now let's see if the PS4 power's on. Bummer. Still the same thing, so let's get the motherboard back out. I think probably what I'm gonna have to do next is reflow that Southbridge. I think it's more likely to be that because there's not a clamp holding that down like there is on the APU. So let's do that next and see if that'll fix it for us. So I'm gonna now reflow this Southbridge chip. And the reason I'm reflowing this is just because since it was in a very bad fall, obviously it was enough to break off this capacitor. Then what I'm worried about is broken solder joints underneath this between the chip and the motherboard. So I'm gonna reflow it, hopefully restore those joints, and then after that, we'll see if that worked. Now, if you were watching carefully, you saw me come in with the tweezers and give it just a little bit of a nudge on the edge of the chip. That's called the nudge test, and that tells you if all the solder joints are liquid. If you give it a little nudge and it doesn't move, then not all the solder joints are liquid. Now it's time to put this board back in and see if it works now. And here goes attempt number 3 to power it on. Still have power to the disk drive, that's good. Let's see if there's power to the rest of the motherboard. No, Well, that's a bummer. In this episode, why not to buy a $40 PS4 on eBay? Well, I'm gonna take it out one more time, just give the motherboard a look over, see if there's anything else I can think of that might help. And if there is, we'll try that. If not, we might have to call it a loss. So I just don't see anything else on this motherboard that looks suspicious. But you know what? Why not? Let's just go ahead and reflow this. We've got nothing to lose. I'm gonna get the thermal paste off, heat it up, and see what it does after a reflow. So I got that APU reflowed. I also went ahead and reflowed all the RAM chips on the back just to make sure they weren't causing a problem. Now I do want to stress that this is not the correct way to reflow, specifically with the APU. I'm not set up to do a proper reflow on an APU, so if you are wanting a reflow done on yours, just don't do it like I did. You need to have a proper jig so it sits nice and flat, and also it's best to heat it from the top and the bottom and use a preheater. And it's actually best to use a reflow machine, which I don't currently have, so that's why I didn't do it. But with all that being said, it is still sometimes possible to do it without all those tools. It's just not a good way to do it. Now I'm gonna get this back in and let's see if it works. So I have it all back together after my last ditch attempt to repair it. Hopefully it works this time. Let's try it out. The disk drive still beeps. That's a good sign. At least we didn't break it too much. Now for the power. Still nothing. Such a bummer. I wanted this one to work so bad, but unfortunately I just can't fix them all. Tune in next time for my ongoing series, What Not to Buy on eBay. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have a good day.